Hello, beautiful ladies. This is the video that I wish was available when I myself was asking the question, what should I do if I want a baby and I'm so young? It was pretty strange back then to have looked for information on the subject, to have worded it every different way in Google searches and not found any information, because there is so much advice out there on why you shouldn't have a baby if you're too young. And yet, if one did want a baby when they're too young, there was no advice for what to do about it. I'm going to start off with just a few facts about that are told, repeated, for why one shouldn't have a baby too young. The first would be that when you are marrying younger, you're more likely to get divorced. And that's not something I was told too much in my own family. That's more something I was told in the general culture. I think I actually have a memory of being told it for the first time by a classmate in the first grade, which is pretty funny. And when I was looking up a statistic to link for you about that today, I found that it does decrease towards the age of 30, and then there's a slight uptick in the chance of divorce into the late 30s before going back down again. Another scientific fact, or at least I thought it was a scientific fact, is that our prefrontal lobe doesn't develop until age 25. When I looked up a nice link to give you about that, I found that it's actually not true that our prefrontal lobe develops at precisely 25. That's just something that's repeated over and over again in our culture. Sometime close to the age of 25, it is developed, but it's not for certain if it actually fully stops at that time. There's evidence of it continuing to develop later. And there's also a pretty wide range of how quickly it develops in different individuals. But the funny thing about that is that this idea that you shouldn't marry before the age of 25 because your prefrontal lobe isn't developed yet is part of just this whole idea that the right way to go about having a baby and getting married is just to wait until the right age. And that's not true. If you read this book, which I'm going to reference quite a few times in this class, that is The Body Keeps the Score. So if you have experienced trauma and not healed from it, the common diagnosis for this is PTSD. And in the book, it describes a separate diagnosis called developmental trauma disorder. If you are in that situation, you don't have the ability to make the best decisions for the future because you can't actually perceive the future. PTSD triggers flashbacks. That's part of you not understanding that right now is separate from whatever happened in the past, and also that there is a future that is separate from both right now and in the past. A third thing that isn't totally related, but something I wish I knew, was that it's still common into the early 20s to not get along with your mother as much. I knew very well in the teenage years that that's normal for teenage years. And I think because I didn't know about that, I was fooled into thinking that I really didn't like her. I really wanted to reject much of what she taught me, even though I still wasn't getting everything that I needed from what my peers had to teach me, which is too bad. And it ended up being that, through me marrying and then divorcing and her not liking that I got divorced, she ended up not speaking to me for the rest of her life. And we ended up missing the opportunity for me to be older and, naturally, hormonally, a little less upset at my mother. So those are the facts, right? So things that I would say are a little less factual, that I think get skewed by people having trouble with theory of mind, are the ideas that you should build your foundation first before having children, and you should also have your life experiences before having children. Theory of mind is the idea that your thoughts and your feelings are different than other people's thoughts and feelings. And it can be really hard to differentiate between good advice for yourself versus good advice for other people, because so much advice is touted as applicable to everyone, but if you examine it really, it has some issues with theory of mind where it assumes that you're thinking the same things that the person giving advice is thinking, and that's just not the case. So, first one, which is the idea that you have to have your life experiences first before having children. I heard this both from my peers, and I also could deduce it from my mother. My mother ended up having a disabled child, and she really felt like her life was ruined by having a disabled child, which is really unfortunate. She really felt as though she couldn't do the things in life that she wanted to do. My own perspective on it is that she did not ask for help enough, and she also did not use enough of her money to pay for someone to babysit him so that she could have a break, her husband could have a break. And, I did what I could with this advice. I heard you have to have these experiences before having children because you just can't once you have children. And, I did some traveling before I had children, but ultimately it wasn't in line with my values. I really believed that I didn't have to be like my mother. I didn't have to think life was over once I had a child who needed a lot from me. And I didn't think my friends were right either, that there were all sorts of things that would be too hard to do once you had children. The other piece of advice that I think gets quite clouded with people struggling with theory of mind is the idea that you need to build your foundation first before having children. And my mother wanted me to go to college, my father too. She taught me the adage that money equals freedom. I think it's a pretty good one, but she wasn't the best example of it. She had plenty of money in the bank, but she was really bothered by a lot that her husband did, but she never used the money to get out. So I'm not really sure how much freedom she got from that. And then also what I had said before about I don't think she used enough of it to pay for babysitting for my brother so that she could have a break. Now, I did what I was told to go to college. I had one college that I wanted to go to more that would have served me better socially, and I listened to my parents and instead went to the college that they thought would look better on my resume. And I didn't make any friends. And there were a couple other reasons why I dropped out too, but one of the reasons why I dropped out of college was just because I hadn't made friends. And if you read the book, you know, I have a PTSD diagnosis. This book describes that something called developmental trauma disorder is going to be a more appropriate diagnosis for a lot of people who have a PTSD diagnosis. And one thing that's very common with developmental trauma disorder is having very poor friendships growing up. In fact, that was probably the hardest chapter for me to read out of this book, is its descriptions of a typical adolescent female versus the one who had been abused. And so, you know, here's another theory of mind thing, that the person giving you advice, you know, they might have thought that you were so socially successful as a child and as a teenager that it just would not harm you whatsoever to just put down socializing and partying and traveling for just a few years, go get your degree, and then go live comfortably. And of course your friends from high school still remembered you and still called you sometimes. You wouldn't have lost all your friends through that. I don't know how necessary it is to go from a childhood where you never have the quantity and quality of friendships that you desire to having that sooner as an adult. But for me, it was very important. And I had friends, and, you know, probably just like wanting to have children, I just had friends instead of having them in the best way possible, which is a funny thing. I also identify as autistic. That's, you know, gonna cause further complications with having good friendships. But it's where I was at the time, for that to be a big value of mine. And there's a track for what you're supposed to do to be financially successful, at least if, you know, you are raised in an affluent area where, you know, in high school they're talking a whole lot about college preparedness, you know, especially if you're raised by two college educated parents yourself. But the track is not laid out for how to go about having friendship if that's not something that's come easy to you. It's just assumed, you know, like many things socially, that you don't have to be taught. You just know, you just do. And here's another funny thing. So this whole idea that you need all these ducks in a row in order to have children, it's also taking on the assumption that having children is going to be the hardest thing in your life. And that might not be the case for everyone. I did finally figure out the answer to the question of why did I want babies so young? I found it out years after it would have been helpful to figure it out. And the reason is parentification. Parentification is when a child is given age-inappropriate responsibility over caring for either siblings or a disabled sibling or a disabled parent. And when you go through parentification as an adult, you can have a greater desire to take care of children and other adults and other animals than other people do. And, you know, if you had gone through that, you also remember back on your experiences of being a child and having, you know, the various tasks you had to do, you know, diapering. I had a pretty special case that not a lot of people get to have, in that my disabled brother potty trained pretty late. So, you know, me as like a 9-year-old would be changing the diaper on an 8-year-old boy. You know, he's only 20 pounds less than me. I'm doing it. I'm changing his diaper. And you look at other people saying it's so hard to take care of children, and you know, this little baby, it's so small, and you change the diaper on someone nearly the same size as you. So I would say that the actual helpful advice for someone who wants to have a baby young is to want even more out of life, to have an even easier life. You know, there's so much advice for, you know, you don't want to have a baby because it's so hard. You don't want to have a baby now because it'd be harder than if you had a baby later. And it might actually not feel hard to you. You know, that advice might really not be true for you. But you know what? It's a wonderful thing if it's easy for you. And if it's easy for you, you should go ahead and have an even better life, more comfortable, easier. You should go for it. I think that's the right answer to this question. I think if someone is thinking of having a baby young, and you know, we know babies are hard to take care of, it's reflective of, for some reason, it doesn't seem that hard to them, even though it seems hard to other people. There's another thing, you know, going back to the body keeps the score, is that if you've had adverse experiences, you know, how it's described in this book is if you have a bad circumstance growing up or in a romantic relationship, when you leave that, you'll tend to also go into another bad one. And I would say that I've had that pattern in my life, but it doesn't feel that way from the inside. I would say how it feels is that, you know, you're used to whatever circumstance, and when you have just a little better, it feels so good. It feels like the best thing ever. And you can't even see when you're in the middle of it how bad it is. It just seems so much better than where you came from. And I certainly had that trouble when I was young, and you know, seeing that my life was pretty great, and I just didn't know that I needed to follow any of the advice told to me. You know, my mother told me growing up that I didn't want to be poor, and I left my mother's house, and it wasn't my mother's house or my father's house, and it seemed much better than their house. So even though I was poor, even though I was in other bad relationships, it seemed so much better. It really didn't seem like it didn't seem like poverty sucked like she described to me. It was very strange. But you know what? I've changed my mind about that. there's something called lifestyle creep, that if you make more money, you're just going to spend more money and you're not ultimately going to be happier. Certainly in my life, I've thought, oh, well, if I had more money, that would just happen to me. I don't need more money. It wouldn't do any good. I wouldn't be any happier. And if I were to look back on my mother and look back on some of the lifestyle creep that she had throughout her life, I would say the same thing. I would see that she has the next best thing and she's really happy about it for a while, and that fades, and then she's unhappy again, and then she wants the next best thing. But I learned a better way through feminine energy. You can also find this more broadly through studying abundance mindset, which is the idea that you can be so happy with what you have now and also want more. And I think that is also a huge solution to the problem of being parentified and thinking that, having a baby is not that hard. And then possibly not even taking the steps to make sure that you have the most comfortable life while you have your children, because it really doesn't seem uncomfortable. And I would also say that feminine energy really helped me, because I otherwise would never have sought out being in full provider relationships. Because of my past, I was happy with things that would not be good enough for other people. And I think when I was having my first daughter, and my ex-husband now, but my husband at the time and I were working opposite shifts for us to both work and also take care of the baby, because there was no availability in daycare for her. I survived it. I think that the main problem was that my ex-husband wasn't putting in a fair amount of chores. So that's something discussed in a book whose name's escaping me, but I really do want to read. And when I read that book, we're going to talk about it. It's going to be fun. But the thing about having a provider husband is that you don't have to worry about that. And there's a funny thing where when you're young and you're too young to intend to have a baby, you think, oh, well, if one accidentally comes along, well, that's fine. And it might very well be fine, but you deserve even better. This video is inspired by a 20-year-old woman I met at an event this past weekend, and she was telling me that she wanted a baby, and she didn't care if she accidentally got pregnant. And I was in the same position when I was her age. I don't know why it didn't happen to me. It happens to other people who don't want babies. But, having even, I went for having a baby in the way that was acceptable to my family, because that was the way that I thought would guarantee their support, because I believed the idea that babies are difficult and babies are expensive. And so I thought I needed to do it in the way in which my parents would still be in my life. Now my family is both very religious and very conservative, much more so than what's common for the area. This is the Seattle area, by the way. Women tend to have babies later here than in other parts of the country. And also people tend to not be as religious and as conservative as my parents are. So it's been a funny place to be, because my mother would have been very happy for me to have been married much younger than I did, because she was really displeased that I would live with people without being married. So I had, a baby in the way she would have wanted, in wedlock. And she, and I ended up divorcing a couple years later. And I didn't know this would happen, but after I made that decision, she never spoke to me again. She was so upset that I had gotten divorced. That was a big surprise to me. I thought that I had a baby in the correct way to guarantee support. The support issue goes back to, building a foundation before having a baby. It's a little bit different, just maintaining, the good opinion of your family, as opposed to building a career foundation or a financial foundation from the ground up. But, that might not have been the best thing for me. I might have had better outcomes if I married someone for their ability to provide, instead of just thinking, oh, I want a baby, I just got to get someone who's just good enough to meet my mother's standards so she's not mad at me. That wasn't on my mind. To do better. And, I didn't date for marriage for that long before my first marriage, because I was pretty scared to go into looking for marriage and looking for people who wanted a baby just like me, even though I was so young. It's really something that I at least felt was very frowned upon, both in my peer group and then more generally in Seattle, at least if you're not hanging around a religious crowd. And that's really too bad, because we're told this idea that you need to have the best financial circumstances before having children. And yet the one option that's going to be really good to really help you, which is, excuse me for the interruption, ladies. So, gold digging. The funny thing is that what you or I might think of as gold digging would not be considered gold digging to someone else, because like I said, when people say bad things about gold diggers, they might just be having theory of mind troubles, or very much the same, we might be having theory of mind troubles, and we might mistake someone going after the bare necessities of life as them gold digging. We might very much mistake things that should be basic comforts as things being extras and things that we don't need. And I think that this idea that we shouldn't be gold diggers ends up hurting the people that need a little more comfort the very most, which is really too bad. And I would have never gotten to study feminine energy except for a friend of mine having introduced it to me a couple years ago. It's a rabbit hole I could have gone down, years ago when I was really wanting a baby. I could have, happened upon it through looking up trad wives. It's not the same as being a trad wife, but if you're looking up stuff about trad wives, you might just find stuff about feminine energy. But at the time, I wouldn't have listened to any of it because I, thought I was very progressive about gender roles, and it would have sounded like gender roles to me, even though if you do study feminine energy, you'll find that the people who, for example, the women in your life who very rigidly followed gender roles and very rigidly adhered to everything that was expected of them, that a lot of them were not in their feminine energy. They did not feel safe through being cared for, which is very important for being in your feminine energy. Plenty of feminine energy teachers recommend therapy if you need it, and plenty of them talk about what to do about your triggers. And another way that, a lot of the old female examples that we have, in all of our lives about women following gender roles, is that a lot of them weren't in their receiving energy. They were cared for, but somehow it didn't translate into, this joyful experience of feeling totally spoiled, which they could have felt, and I'm sure the first few times that they felt it, that they were cared for by their husbands or their dates, they might have felt totally spoiled, but it's not something that they kept up with. And there's also this funny idea that, what you have isn't going to make you happy. It's related to this idea of lifestyle creep, that if you keep having the same nice things won't make you so happy. But when you do have nice things, there's still work to be done in your head to feel as happy as you can with those things. And I think I should have gone that route as opposed to thinking, oh, it doesn't matter if I have all these things. I don't really need all these things. A last thing I'll talk about as far as, if you want a baby young, if you've been parentified, that you should explore seeking out more comfort and more pleasure in life than you think you need, because perhaps you're calibrated, not the same as everyone else. And perhaps you're capable of even more comfort and even more joy than everyone else, which would be a really wonderful thing for you. But a last piece that I want to talk about with that is this book suggestion, which I don't have the desk cover, but this is Bringing Up Bebe, in which it describes the idea that the best way to raise a child is to be a little more hands-off, give it a little less attention, and for the mother to feel totally pampered and at ease. It compares American and French parenting. The American mother who is overworked, stressed, feels like she has to constantly give her kids so much attention, even though she really doesn't have the energy to. And yet she's putting in all that effort and she's so tired, and yet her kids are still worse behaved than the French kids, and they still don't eat the great variety of foods that French kids are willing to eat. And it's, for me, it was very in line with what I believed already, which is, I had a mother who had a disabled child. This is a child that I took care of as a young child, and yet she, as an adult, said that, her life is ruined because of him. And so I then had the belief that no, children don't ruin lives. You can still have a good life with a child. Children aren't difficult. Some people come across not the same belief, in that they might come from a culture where there's many children in every family, or they might just have their one family where there were many children and each individual child was not given enough attention. So they might respond to that by wanting to give their children a lot of attention and not wanting to ever relax because they don't want to be, a bad parent that doesn't give their kid enough attention. And if you're the variety of parentified person who's a little bit in that lane, I do recommend that book a whole lot for just learning some other perspective. Another thing I would recommend is for you to look up videos on how not to treat your man or your boyfriend or your husband like a toddler, because I would have to wonder that if you are parentified and you really are seeking out having children to take care of, that perhaps you're doing more caring for your boyfriend or maybe even other people in your life than you should be. I don't have any videos up on my channel yet about that, but some things that you can search are how not to mother your man, and also how to use natural consequences with men. And finally, I just want to let you know that you're doing really great. If you know what you want, that's amazing. It's hard when you know what you want and it's not what the whole world is telling you should want. You might even be in the same case as me, where I had a religious conservative mother, and yet I still wanted a baby, but I didn't want the full package deal of having a baby and the exact marriage that she would have for me and the exact lifestyle she would have for me. I wanted a lot of the lifestyle of my peers, and yet I also wanted a baby. And I felt alone, and I felt like I had to figure out how to pave a middle path for myself between those. It was really hard because I would try to look up information and I just could not find what I was hoping to find. I hope that this video is some of what you're looking for. And it's so great that you know what you want, and you can have even more than what you want. It's really amazing. What you want might be so little. I look back on my life and there's so many details of my life years ago that at the time made me very happy and now are just not good enough. I am very happy to have grown with my wants and desires. It's been a big part of my healing, and may it be a big part of yours. Please subscribe. I really want to see you in the next one. Bye.